Imagine a world where cash no longer exists, just digital transactions. There's no coins, there's no wallets. Sounds a little bit futuristic, doesn't it? Or maybe a little scary. Hi, this is Enrique. Welcome back to my channel. Today, we're going to be talking about a world where there's no longer cash and all you're dealing with is just digital transactions. So in today's world, we do have many people that are starting to use technology such as PayPal. We have Zelle, we have Venmo, and we have a lot of different digital transfers, cryptocurrencies, central digital bank currencies. You have countries like the US and China that are currently trying to implement these types of digital currencies within our society. You have a country like Sweden, who in 2023, out of all the transactions that were generated during that year, only 9% of those transactions were actually in cash. You have India and you have China that are also trying to push to try to get the majority of their population to switch to just having digital transactions. You have China in particular that has a technology called Alipay, and they have their WeChat that also has a technology called WeChat Pay. And you just have a lot of different countries over the world. That's where they're gearing their trend is towards complete digital transactions, not having to hold any physical cash, and also incorporate their own different technologies to get people to stop using transactions that are not 100% trackable. There's also an increase in the population of people using more cryptocurrencies. You have countries like El Salvador that incorporated Bitcoin within their financial system. You have this new administration in the United States that wants to adopt having a Bitcoin reserve. And you have companies within the United States as well that also want to incorporate having reserves in cryptocurrency. And then you also have different countries that are trying to develop their own central digital bank currencies as well. So what are the pros and cons of having a cashless society? Recently, you have had a lot of people that are less often going to the banks now, especially after 2020 and the pandemic. You have a lot of people no longer are willing to spend time to go to the bank and withdraw cash. So what do? They resort to using more cashless payments. That has been increasing over time. So you have a lot of people doing contactless payments recently. You have a lot of people that think that you will have reduced crime because people are no longer carrying cash. Now that could be considered a positive thing when it comes to not carrying cash. The only thing is unfortunately, if there's thieves out there that can no longer take cash from people, the next thing that could happen would be that these people, they could be kidnapped, especially in third world countries. They can actually be held ransom till they unlock their phones, withdraw or transfer their funds to the thieves. That's just a little bit of a tidbit, in my opinion, that if you do decide to travel outside of the United States to a third world country, you don't carry a phone with you that has access to your accounts using any passwords or any touch ID or face ID technology. That's where the criminals are probably going to head to, kidnapping you and having you withdraw all your funds and transfer them to these thieves. Another pro to having a cashless society would be the fact that a lot of these governments, they would be saving a lot of money because they would no longer have to print and produce, mint all of these coins and paper currencies. Another pro to having a cashless society would be the fact that you would have a lot of businesses that would no longer have to handle all of that cash. And you would also have the banks that would no longer have to handle all that. So you do have a lot of people that are constantly receiving a lot of cash in their businesses, such as gas stations or any other type of businesses like taco stands or restaurants that have to grab all this cash and deposit it. And so a lot of these banks, they will charge you a fee based on the amount of cash that you are actually depositing into these banks. So that would also be a big savings. A lot of people in this world do not have access to a bank nearby. So by you having your cell phone and an internet connection, you could actually make digital transfers without having a bank nearby. So this was something that couldn't be done in the past, but now it makes it a lot easier for everybody in the world to be interconnected and to be able to transact on a faster level. So what would be some of the cons of having a cashless society? Number one, I think for most people, would be privacy concerns. So you have countries such as China that are starting to get people heavily accustomed to using only digital transactions. The problem is that now every single transaction of yours will actually be tracked. Everything that you do, you'll have the country pretty much on top of all your transactions. So I think that is actually a big risk for a lot of people, because a lot of people still depend on having that anonymity when they're doing transactions between each other. So when you're using cash, those transactions are not tracked by anyone. Another con that you have on having a cashless society would be the fact that now you are at risk of having that exchange or that bank being hacked by a third party. So if you no longer can transact in cash, you will always have that risk of waking up in the morning and your account being completely wiped out. So another con of having a cashless society would be the people the least benefited from this would be the older population and would be low income individuals that do not have access to the digital platforms or do not have the literacy to be able to use these devices or these computer systems to be able to complete the digital transactions. So you also have certain homeless populations in the United States, especially the ones that live around areas that have less cash transactions, that are having a hard time to be able to collect cash from people, because if less people are transacting cash, that makes it worse for the homeless population that's trying to grab money from these people. Another con to having a cashless society, we would be very dependent on the technology behind it not crashing, or the electric grid. So if our electricity goes down, or if the technology behind this currency or these digital payments decided to go dark, you wouldn't be able to do proper transactions amongst people. Another con would be having the government or countries in general or institutions freezing all your funds and for you not to being able to do any transactions any longer. If you had cash, you were able to make transactions amongst individuals without worrying about what the government would say or do. If the government wanted to, they could prohibit you to be able to use your currency at any moment, or if you were in a certain country, they could block you access to your own funds. You could have corporations and governments block you access to your own funds, which would be very detrimental to the society to be able to make free trade. So how could shopping, transportation, and tipping be affected by a cashless society? So obviously, if you go shopping, you wouldn't have to carry the cash around. Basically, a lot of the jobs right now that the people have at stores would be replaced by artificial intelligence, because you no longer would need someone at the register. If everything is being done digitally, then you don't have to deal with a human. As long as the machine is there, and as long as you have enough surveillance, you may only need one individual to be there if the machine decides to go awry. But other than that, everything can be done with the machine. When it comes to transportation, when you go into a bus or you go into a train or you go into a taxi, again, all of this can be dealt with some sort of machine inside the vehicle or inside the train, where you could just transact all your digital payments using your phone or your watch. And when it comes to tipping, then all these tips would be tracked and they would all become taxable, which means that these people that depend on tips, they can no longer hide this money from the government. Everything will be traced, everything will be tracked. Gone will be the days where people will be able to stash away cash if they depend on tips. When it comes to the government, they will have an easier time to be able to collect the taxes from people. So the government will have an easier time to keep track of everybody's transactions. And this can also do away with a lot of jobs. There's going to be a lot of loss of jobs, but at the same time, it'll make it easier for the government to be able to tax people. What are the cultural shifts behind having a cashless society. There's a lot of people out there that like to give cash gifts, whether it be at birthdays, anniversaries, weddings, or any other type of event where people like to have cash on them to be able to give them to family members. That will no longer be a thing. So this will actually introduce another problem for people, because now every single gift that they decide to give to a family member will also be tracked by the government. Another example of how the government will be able to see everything that you do. So how will this affect people? A lot of people will start turning into bartering to get around this surveillance from the government. Start introducing more of bartering transactions. And also, if the cryptocurrencies are not adopted by these governments, more and more people will start running towards cryptocurrencies as an alternative to try to not have the government survey everything that they do. So again, some of the pros of having a cashless society: you have convenience, you have a potential for reduced crime, and you have a lot of cost savings in general. Now, when it comes to the cons of having a cashless society, you have a real threat of cybersecurity, people from certain groups that will no longer be able to interact with the general population when it comes to transactions. And then you have privacy concerns. So those are things that are a con to having a cashless society. So I personally think that this whole situation is already underway, but I don't personally think that this is actually feasible worldwide, since a lot of countries out there are not as ready in general to be able to accept cashless payments. So what do you think? Do you think that we are ready to go fully cashless? Please let me know in the comments below. Please like this video, share it with anyone that you think might benefit from this information, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. I'll continue to provide you videos that I think will make you a better person, and I'll see you on the next one. Take care.